Councilman in Ward 2 here in the city of Reading. And before we do anything, I'd like everyone to rise and we'll say the Pledge of Allegiance, and that's why I put the screen up, so that's all. I pledge allegiance to the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, I appreciate that. We'll all say our own prayer to ourselves. We always start a meeting with prayer, but we'll say one to yourself. Yes, sir. Not working? Dennis, I don't have this working. Now we got it working? All right, sir. I've been talking to Denny for about 20 years about working and taking care of the television stuff here. So first of all, why am I here and why do we have this meeting tonight? Well, back years ago when I was mayor, we only had 2 meetings a month for council, and they were always typically the first and third Tuesdays of the month. And what I did then is initiated a program which I called the Mayor's Advisory Committee. And subsequent to that, later on when I got into council, we still were only having 2 meetings a month. And then I started what I called a Second Ward Advisory Committee. Now what has happened recently in the city, the council has decided to vote to go back. And I think it was 2007, we set up a program where we met every Tuesday night. And the first and third Tuesday nights were set up for purposes of having legislation and public meetings and reports of committees and so on and so forth. The second and fourth Tuesday nights were truly designed so that we could have really discussion among the members of council, but as Mr. Feldman knows, he attends most of those meetings. But I think occasionally when he has missed them, we've had to excuse him by vote of council because he attends so many of them. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is during that meeting, citizens still had a right to participate. They came up to the mic and we talked about what was going on in the city. It was done in a more informal fashion on the second and fourth Tuesdays of the month. Now recently, and we set these up back in about 2007, 2008, I forget exactly. Well recently, I don't know why I voted against it, but they're now only meeting again on the first and third Tuesdays of the month for official council meetings. And there are no real reports on them. The third night, they basically vote on legislation. So it eliminated the second and fourth Tuesday night. So for an opportunity to get back to have citizen participation, especially since we've had the COVID and we've had the issues of people not being able to even come and participate in council meetings and what is going on, I decided that, you know, it's time then to go back to the old idea of having my Second Ward Advisory Committee. I'm the councilman in the Second Ward. But anybody can attend, and I wanted to have an open forum. And I have an extra microphone, thanks to Dennis for providing that. Anybody who wants to get up and say something, we'll allow that to occur at the later portion of the meeting. Now, one of the things that is most important right now that has come before council, and I think many of you were called. I had assisted to make some phone calls. We have before council right now, I think, is a very important ordinance that we're exploring. And that has to do with the issues of people who own rental property in the city. Now, you know, there are problems whether it's rental property or someone owns their own home. I mean, we do have a housing code officer, we have a building department, we have things where we try to make sure that people abide by the local rules. Well, it came through, and I'm on the Laws and Contracts Committee of Council as well. And it came up in the meeting, and it was proposed by the chairman of that committee, which she took on a tough job. I'm not faulting her for it, to look into and to explore the problems we may have with people who own rental units and don't take care of them properly. And they devised an ordinance, and that was explored by both the fire chief another member of council, and Mr. Powell is on that committee with me. But with the COVID and that, we didn't go into it, in my opinion, as much detail as we could. We just now got back into having open meetings and meeting in council. And this ordinance has then been put on the floor. And after I reviewed the existing ordinance, this is not the existing ordinance that you have in your hand, by the way. This is an ordinance that I developed myself. The existing ordinance that's on the floor basically had elements in there of requiring all people who have rental units in the city to fill out through the way it was proposed, if I understand it, and I don't want to speak for someone else, that they could do this over the internet and they could bring up a form, fill it out, and submit it, and therefore, you know, the citizens in the Reading then who are having issues concerning elements of conflict potentially with their landlords and were unhappy, they could go on and find out you know, who owns that property or what is going on. Building department could use that as a source. But in reviewing it myself, part of it there, anybody who was 18 years old or older had to be put into the report. Now I know it was just brought up before I started the meeting tonight that there are requirements already that people have to report to the city of Reading concerning tenants in their property. And I'm seeing some head shaking here, and I realize that. But you have to understand that ordinance was passed some years ago primarily for the purpose of the income tax department. We do have people who move into the city and they rent property, and therefore they may or may not know that they're employed and may owe us income taxes. So it was not an unfair effort to get people to report to the city. Did you want to comment already? Oh, I'm sorry. Wanted to report to the city that these people lived in these properties, and therefore the tax department would send them out a notice and find out if they were not employed and whether they owed us any money and so forth. But that's totally confidential data. That is not data that we in the general populace and the operation of the city are entitled to know. And the treasurer has made it quite clear, and I agree with him totally, and the new treasurer who will be coming in, because the present treasurer who works at the Board of Election will not be able to run for re-election as a result due to that conflict, also agrees that that'll never be disclosed, which is true and proper. Now, what came down is a new ordinance developed that would say that property owners who are renting property now have to go back and go through another process of reporting to the city data about who lives there, who was over 18 years old, and so forth. And if they didn't fulfill it, then they would be required to pay a fine. Well, first of all, in my analysis of looking into that ordinance, and I said this both in the committee and before council, the people who are already abiding by the law are the ones that we are now requiring to do this process. And my argument would be the ones who are not doing it, are they going to do it anyway now? I mean, why would they tend to do that? Now, I don't want to get into throwing stones. And somebody brought it up here earlier tonight, and they said, oh my God, council, all you do is argue and fight. And, well, isn't that government? I thought that's what government was about. Actually, a good old friend of mine, I don't always agree with the mayor now, but his father used to say, if 7 councilmen agreed on everything, you wouldn't need 7 councilmen, you'd only need 1 councilman. So I have an argument with people who are upset about having discourse. Now, it should be courteous and friendly and forthright. I don't have any problem with that. So in raising my arguments about this ordinance, that was on the floor, it's still on the floor, and thanks to some of you who did come to the council meeting last week, that was an open forum, made some complaints, and there was changes. There's no longer some requirements in there about reporting all the people who are 18 years of age. There's parts in there that doesn't go into other issues. But when I did my research and started to look at it, I want to go at it in a different perspective. why do I want to go after the people who are already abiding by the law and then have them do something that I think is redundant, which means we're going to do it again, and not come up with a plan that goes after those who are not abiding by the law? One should all understand, and I hope all of you got a copy of this, I just drew it up today. In Ohio, we already have, if you'll turn to my Exhibit A in this ordinance, if you look in the back of there, it's 53-2302. There's one in the back there. There is a state statute that requires people, when they fill out their transfer form in the auditor's office, to note whether they have rental property or they don't have rental property. Now, that notes on our ability to do research who owns that property and whether or not they do have or they don't have property that they're already renting. To me, again, we're just asking the same people in Reading who are already abiding by that rule to do it again. So, Exhibit A, I wanted you to note, I'm outlining what the state statute is to begin with. Now, if you turn to Exhibit B, I'm not going to read this whole statute to you, so I made copies, you can take it home. Exhibit B is a form, let's say, and there's an oversight, it was filled out incorrectly, or you didn't do it correctly, and this is all available on the internet. So a residential rental property registration form is provided. So you therefore can go online if you happen to have made a mistake or you didn't put down the correct information when you recorded your document or took your document for transfer in the auditor's office and you did not fill it out correctly, you can correct that simply by getting this form off of the internet and refiling it. Now, my view, I'm one person here, and this is my second ward advisory. You can tell me where to go or not go with it. That's your prerogative, so I'll let you come up to the mic. My view is that we have an ability already in the system through our government, the state of Ohio, our auditor's office, to secure the data that this other ordinance is proposing. And I think it's redundant. We don't need that. Now, let's go back to the beginning of the meat of the ordinance. And I'm going to highlight a bit. The preambles, we do this to say why we create an ordinance. First of all, I'm stating in my preamble that we have 53-2302. It's a legal requirement if you own real estate and you buy a piece of real estate in Ohio, and a county that has more than 200,000 people, you're required to report to the county auditor when you go through the transfer department of the auditor's office that you in fact have rental units. Now, there are people who incorrectly file that. Now, whether it's deliberate or just merely an accident, regardless, there's ignorance is no defense in the law. That's what I've been doing for 49 and a half years in this business. So ignorance, it can't be a defense. Now, you don't want to go out and punish people because they made a mistake. However, my view is that there is the opportunity, and this preamble says that if they have not filed it correctly, and we get into trying to do some research, we want to not put the people who are abiding by the law into the conflict of saying, they got to do it again, or do it over, or keep doing it. So when we find an issue, and this has nothing to do with income taxes, by the way, because we're not allowed to get to that. Keep remembering that fact. This ordinance then states that the city of Reading, when it's in a position of trying to determine if we have a problem with a rental unit, could be a single family home. We may not know that it's a rental unit when it's a single family home. So when that is discovered, then there is the ability to go to the Hamilton County Auditor's Office, look up the records, and say, well, gee, you know, who is ABC LLC? You know, a limited liability company. You know, it isn't going to be Tim Schmidt, name down there, it owns a property, or he may own a corporation. I don't know. I don't remember. It's none of my business, frankly. But nevertheless, those people have to set up what's called a statutory agent. if you're a company or you're a fictitious name, we call that, under the law of the state of Ohio, you have to set up a statutory agent, which is a human person in their name and their address so that you can find them. And then you say, hey, building department found a problem, Mr. Jones. And I hate to say this is common among attorneys. You create a corporation or an LLC, a lot of attorneys like to name themselves the statutory agent. Why would they do that? Because if there's a problem, guess who gets served? The lawyer. And then they can go to their client and say, hey, we got a problem. You want to hire me to do this work now? Now that I live in a glass house, I don't like to throw stones, but it's a reality. I've seen that. I don't do that when I create LLCs or corporations. But nevertheless, we have problems where there could be a corporation down in Texas somewhere. And they don't file. And they don't file, if they don't file a proper statutory agent, we have the right as citizens and government to put that corporation out of business in Ohio. Now it takes steps and action to go file suits. But you want to do business in Ohio, I don't care if you're an insurance company, you're a rental unit, or you're a whatever it is, you're a paint cars or anything. You have to go through these processes if you're a fictitious name. So now let's assume for the sake of argument, we can't find them. Now, be either fire chief or the head of the building department or safety service director, somebody has to spend time to go and find them. Now, I don't know how much you know about unclaimed funds or how much you know about people, because I do a lot of probate too, when you can't find heirs. I can guarantee you I know how to find companies that know how to find people. And they can be employed to do that. I always use the story, I had to serve a guy a paper, going to get some money out of him in the state, couldn't find him. And another friend of mine who's an attorney, I called, he had a private detective agency out of Montgomery County. Called him up, he was driving down from Dayton to Cincinnati. I said, I need to find this guy, he lives somewhere in the valley here, and I don't know where he's at. He called me back in about 20 minutes, he didn't even get here yet. He said he lives right over in Laughlin, he's on William Street. I said, William Street? I said, I can walk to William Street from here. That's where he was. I don't know how he found him, I couldn't find him. But anyway, there are agencies that can find people. So my argument is that the city should be permitted, and that's when you get into the sections here. Now, therefore, so when the proper methods are not followed, then I think that the city should take aggressive steps to try to find them legitimately. And therefore, people haven't filed correctly. The Exhibit B's here. I put it in my ordinance that many of you, I've found out, were not even aware this ordinance and the other ordinance was even being considered. So this requires an annual notice to every piece of real estate in the city already that these forms exist, and you have to follow them if you haven't already. So I'm trying to take the load off our people who are being cooperative. I'm putting in the public service that we're going to take the city upon ourselves through public notice. Tell everybody at least once a year. You can put it in the paper. You can, I would say, deliver it to every piece of real estate. And as somebody said to me, I was walking in, everybody gets water bills, do they not? Why not put something in there and say, hey, this is the statute, by the way, do you remember? Doesn't have to be a lengthy, I don't have to put the whole form in there. So I'm first saying that we have to notice people. Secondly, that the Exhibit B is in here. If you haven't done it, then do it. You know, how hard is that? People make mistakes. So fill it out. And the third one says, if you have not done it and you are a qualifying business and you haven't followed the rules, then we can go out and hire a company to find you. And that'll be levied against the person to whom we're trying to find when and if we finally locate them. The fourth one changes the rules a little bit because the state statute, when I read it, 530302, does not have any kind of real teeth in doing anything. I think it was $150 they add on to their real estate taxes. So I put in this ordinance that if you violate this, you now can be charged in Reading Mayor's Court, because I made it a local ordinance. I don't want to go downtown for everything. a 4th degree misdemeanor. You can be fined, I think it's up more now, but it used to be $250 or 30 days in jail or both. And if people start to realize that they have to follow the law, I think we solved a lot of our issues. I talked to the fire chief. I don't have a statistic about how many people are not following the law, but I find my opinion, which I can't support absolutely, but what I'm hearing, probably 90% of you are following the law. So 10% of the people, let's say if it's that large, if they're not following the law, then we have to figure out a way to coerce them to follow the law and not be putting an onus back onto you, the people who are sincerely doing what we're asking you to do. So that's this in a nutshell. I ran off enough. I hope you all got one. You can take it home. This is not law. It's not been passed by council. It's a new document I submitted. As I said, it's already been submitted to council. They made changes because of many of you coming to the meeting last week. There's been changes made. I still don't support that ordinance, and I'm not going to vote for that one. I believe, as I think Shirley mentioned, it's a new ordinance. We should start all over. And I'd like to back off and talk about them all and open the meeting, open the forum. Anybody who wants to participate in discussion ought to have an opportunity. So at this moment, anybody wants to come up and say something, you're welcome to do that, or I can go on. This second ward forum that I created here, advisory committee, this is not the only issue I want to talk about tonight, to be blunt. I have other issues I want to talk about. I want to thank Mr. Ashbrook. We have been talking about the streetscape and other improvements for Benson Street. I have strong feelings about that. I was involved in 1983. I guess people say I ramble too much. And maybe, Bob, did you bring your clicker? I told them that when I talk too much, you get a clicker like a dog. They can stop me from going off and rambling. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, Don Likens here. I like this. I think this is brilliant. I didn't think of this.
No, don't go that far, because I think my mother would ever agree with that.
I think this thing isn't on, but I think this is brilliant. And I really commend you for coming up with this idea. I got to tell you, I like it. One thing, though.
Is that
probably a good thing.
Dennis, is that working?
Hello, hello, hello.
Yeah, get closer.
Hello. Can you hear me now?
He can hear you, yes, Dennis.
Okay.
Yes.
So,
By the way, we're on cable television, so hopefully the people out there are learning too.
So I mean, I've got a lot of property in Reading, and I love this city and that ordinance, and I like Katie and all that, but oh my God, it was going to be such a burden for me. So I'm glad they watered it down. If it does pass, and they've watered it down so that it doesn't affect me as much, but it still affects me. This is brilliant. I fill this out. I didn't know about this until probably 3 years ago. I've been paying this $150 to the county, and my taxes have gone out. I looked at my tax bill finally a couple years ago, and I'm like, what is this? They called them up, they're like, yeah, you didn't file the rental form. I'm like, oh my God. So now I save $150 a year on all my rentals. A couple $1,000 a year. Take my lovely girlfriend out to dinner more.
There you go.
But Mr. Gerst, I want to add one more thing, though, that I did research with the tax department downstairs, or next door, I guess, next door, and we concluded that you can write an ordinance that will get that information from the tax department. I don't know if you looked at that. I sent an email to you and other people, and we looked at it. And it says you can't get anything from the tax department unless the city creates an ordinance for it, for business use. This is clearly business use. I'd like for you to comment on that. But this is brilliant, thank you. But I'd say get it from the tax department, create an ordinance. I don't know. Please comment on that.
I would glad to. The treasurer at the last meeting pointed out I wasn't part of your discussion with that office. I have nothing to control in that office. And that's the way it should be. You know, no one else should know other than the people who are working in the office and or the treasurer. But we were led to believe, at least in a meeting now, and Mr. Lindeman here, he's a councilman too. But it's my understanding that that was not correct. I don't know. I think if that's going to be explored, then I think that the treasurer and who runs the office is going to have to sit down and develop what can or cannot be released. Well, I was told, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
But I was told that they will never give you anything specific about any taxpayer. Now, they might talk about, how much does the industries that have more than 25 employees generate to the city, or something of the nature on a broad base, but they will not give us any data about any specific taxpayer and what they do. Now, I don't know the answers, I haven't looked at it, but I know that the treasurer would not agree even if we pass legislation on the floor to do that, and I don't know that I could vote for that either, Mr. Likens, I'll be frank.
Well, so I worked with the tax people and we went over that law and we read that, we all read it. He wasn't in the office, your brother, I guess, right?
No, that's my nephew.
Your nephew. He wasn't.
I'm always the older guy they want to point out.
He wasn't in the office, but the tax department, it says you can't get anything unless you pass an ordinance and it's got to be for a good use. And we're not asking for people's salaries, we're asking for their names and their tenants' names if they really want the tenants' names. I agree that they don't need it, but they can get the names of the landlords that we already give to the tax department, and it's written in Ohio law already. So I think the problem is in the Ohio law, it's like the third sentence in, and you've got to we've had to read it 3 or 4 times, and we're like, oh yeah, it says it. It's clear as day to us, and we sent it to Patrick, and we sent it to, and she was going to have Melvin take it up to the solicitor. So.
Well, but you're making a point that I want to explore, that why don't we continue with an open discussion about any of these issues and not take, we have 1, 2, 3 meetings on this, and 2 of them where I think I may be there. I'm not positive. May have been even in a Zoom meeting, which I don't know how you people enjoyed the Zoom meetings, but you could not communicate, see what was going on.
The other thing, and you brought it up earlier about the fire department couldn't give you numbers. How bad is this problem with these out-of-state landlords? I spent a half an hour on the phone today with Ricky Martin. Great guy.
Ricky Martin is a housing code officer in the city,
and
so everybody should know.
I specifically asked him, I said, how many letters do you send out of state? He said, I send a lot of letters. I said, how many times do those reoccur? He says, I can't think of anything reoccurring. He said, I just sent a letter to a Dallas owner the other day, and the problem is fixed. So, I mean, and the fire department can't give you numbers on how bad the problem is. What are we really trying to solve with this ordinance? And that's been my big beef with Katie. I've asked her publicly on Facebook, where are these problems? Give me an address where you can't find the owner, and let us try and find it for you. I guarantee I can find it like your friend in 10 minutes. She wasn't able to do that. So I'm not sure. I think that she rushed to this ordinance. The fire chief hasn't given you any data. I mean, we're creating laws for what? That's my big beef. And
the only thing I would comment, Mr. Likens, is that, and I don't want to take thunder away from Mr. Lindeman, there was a property up on, near his neighborhood, let's put it that way. I don't want to get into specifics because I don't want to be pointing the finger at anybody. But it was the tenant that went out and broke the windshield out of their own car and busted the windows out of it. And it was really a mess. I mean, it truly was. And, but it wasn't the landlord that caused it. When they finally did some research and they got a hold of the landlord, it was out of state if I remember correctly, but they had a company out of Dayton that did all their service and all their buildings. So they came down, if I'm correct, and took care of the repairs. So to your point, the problem got solved.
And Ricky Martin, I mean, he gets on me when my grasses are high and garbage is laying around, all that stuff, and I try to fix it before I get a letter from me. But he said, yeah, I don't really see this as a big problem. And he did bring up one case. We had a house that couldn't get a hold of somebody. The owner died. Heaven forbid, for the guy. But,
well,
so I mean,
that was a problem on the north end.
Ricky Martin is not coming forth with all these problems of all these out-of-state landlords that Katie makes it out to be. But if we have to pass something, this is better than what they have. But I still think we need to look at getting it from the tax department with another ordinance.
Okay, well, that's why we're here. Go ahead, Tim.
We have to give a name and whatever.
Now, we're not in council. You can if you want. It's helpful. I know a lot of you anyway.
I think most people know who I am anyway, Tim Schmidt. Well, grew up in Reading and I moved all the way to Sharon. But I think this ordinance and the previous ordinance are duplicates. I don't think it's necessary. You have the there is this law that you quote here, the state law. You have the city, the law director or solicitor, what's the term now?
Law director.
Law director. You have the Hamilton County prosecutor. You have the state attorney general. Those departments ought to be able to go after those out-of-state lawyers or out-of-state owners, or any owner that's violating this section in the Ohio Revised Code. And I think it's duplicating that law. As far as the one that was presented last week that I spoke about, I know Katie said that she's making quite a few adjustments and taking this out and that and whatever. I think that ought to be thrown out and have a new ordinance. Not read for the fourth time, but read for the first time. And again, what I mentioned last week to her, or to council, that the property owners were not notified that this was going to happen. Her comment was, well, yes, they were. It was on Facebook, it was on the internet. You know, I don't get on Facebook. I don't get on the city's website. You need to mail a letter telling the property owner, this is what's going to happen, and we're going to discuss it tonight. That did not happen. So,
Well,
I just think if we got the state law, we don't need another.
I appreciate all your comments, Tim. The only thing I would back off on, I'm not here to defend anybody, but I think Mrs. Detachico was trying to do the best she could, and she was working hard at it. I don't want to be throwing stones at her, and I don't agree with her very often, but that's politics, that's government, that's why we have what we have. Just because I disagree with her, don't mean I disrespect her. I think she was doing the best she could, and she was working on it. And she talked, the fire chief was in the meetings. I attended a couple of the meetings. I shouldn't admit this. Now, the meetings are on Thursday night, and that's half-price wines at Bishop's Quarter. And my son, so, that's like, remember Rain Man, 4 o'clock, Judge Wapner? Well, Thursday night's half-price wines at Bishop's Quarter. That's my son-in-law and daughter's place. So I go out there with my wife for dinner almost every Thursday night. So I had trouble trying to make that arrangement, but I did make exceptions. I did go to the meetings. I did participate. I told them, council, hey, that's why I'm a troublemaker, I guess, because if I don't agree, I tell you. I'm not going to tell you to smooth it over, it's not my nature. So I appreciate, Tim, what you're saying, and I agree with you, but the only thing in my research that I looked at this is what Mr. Likens pointed out. I think the only penalty is increasing the taxes $150. There isn't really much teeth in trying to enforce it, and well, I don't want to go downtown to enforce it. I don't need the Attorney General's office. You ever try to work with? Now, there's some great people up there, but at the same time, the farther you go up the ladder, the more difficult it is to try to get some action sometimes.
We're paying them too.
Well, I'm not arguing that point. I agree with you, but at the same time, if I can solve the problem on a local basis and a local level, I think that's what we should do. And I have it in there, when you get a chance to read it thoroughly, that we are going to be putting notices out to tell people how this particular statute is to be used and applied and what you can do to solve the problem. I'm not here to get people into mayor's court. Ricky Martin and, of the number of people that actually, when there was violations, they're probably minuscule that actually go to court, to be frank with you. Yes, Sheila? You want to step up to the mic or just, okay. Once. If you did it, you've already completed it.
I'm not even sure because I've never seen this before.
Well, you did it. Well, that form in there, I'm glad you pointed that out. That form is for those who did not fill out the transfer form. When you buy a piece of property anywhere in Hamilton County, and you take it down to the auditor's office, there's a form that you fill out. The closing officer fills it out, or the attorney fills it out, or you can do it yourself. And at the bottom, there's questions that you answer yes or no. And one of those questions specifically says, is this rental property? And that's where it also quotes the statute that I just told you about. So when you go in, if you inadvertently or negligently or deliberately did not mark it in a correct fashion, and then we do discover at a later point in time, or because you were negligent, it was an honest mistake, you can go online and pull that form up because you've already filed your transfer form to the auditor's office. That's been filed. And you correct it with that form that's in that packet. That's only in there for if you need to fix it.
Well, as far as I know, when we bought the property, our attorney filed all that out.
Correct?
Correct.
Is there a way that I can go in
Yes.
easily to see
Yes.
if in fact it is filed correctly?
Yes, you call up the Hamilton County Auditor's Office and ask him with the transfer form how it was marked.
You can see it online.
Yeah, that's right, you can go online.
Transfer summary and over extra documents.
So anyway,
Yeah.
anybody have any other questions on this point? Because I sincerely appreciate you coming tonight. And I wasn't sure if anybody's going to show up because I didn't get time to put any publication out on this, other than phone calls that Mary Lynn did for me, and I appreciate my niece doing that for me. Go ahead, Mark.
Mark Bishop. I recognize Ms. Setichigo's approach to this. A lot of areas of town are trying to do that. Sharonville's one that's trying to pass one if they haven't already. Cincinnati, I think Newport, Covington is doing it. I've been party to some conversation with the apartment association locally regarding these type of ordinances. Most of them have been geared toward getting money. They've been all about inspections and getting money and really driving people nuts if they have property.
Correct.
Some areas have a much bigger problem than Reading does. So I can understand some of that, but the owners are fighting it in those areas because they don't want it to be that intrusive. I actually like this approach because I think all it's really doing is giving the city of Reading some teeth to not only get their expenses back, because one of the arguments is that city employees are having to spend their time searching these people down. If they can just hire somebody to do it and then charge the owner, if the owner, it's a one-time fee, they're going to charge for them finding them. So I think as long as costs can be recovered, and this doesn't cause you to fill out additional forms, and it brings this form to their attention too. So if anybody who owns property knows that this form now exists, the big question is how to get this form out to people.
Section 1 requires us to do it.
Right. So it's getting it out and making sure that the owner gets.
Once a year, every piece of property in Reading. And it's going to be, I put the onus on council if you read it. I didn't put it on anybody else. Council has to commission the publication that it's going to go to every piece of real estate in Reading.
I think it's a good approach. It takes advantage of a law that's already in existence.
Correct.
And doesn't cause anybody to file anything else. So,
Thank you, Mark. That was done quickly. I don't expect it to be, I put it out to the council, all of them today in an email. I said, let's talk about it. This is one opinion, other ones have other opinions, but I don't want to rush and vote something in and then have to come back and repeal the thing, you know.
So what can we do? This is better than what is on the docket now. What can we do to tell everybody? Should we email all the other councilmen and say?
Well, next Tuesday night, show up here at 7:30 and go into it in depth. Now, I'm going to be embarrassed to say I won't be there because if I try to be there, I will be divorced after 52 years if I'm here next Tuesday night. So, and she's shaking her head there because I'm going to be on vacation. I shouldn't say that because I don't like to say that publicly.
Is that the final vote next Thursday for that new purple?
Tuesday, well, it can be, yes. Go ahead.
I just wanted to bring up one point, because the landlord, Sunday, a week ago, was when I got a phone call that I didn't know anything about this, my wife and I didn't, and I thought it was a spam call, because I got a phone call on Sunday, afternoon, saying, hey.
What do you think, that young lady in the red back there?
In the chambers on Tuesday, so it was
The
really.
communication is key.
Yeah.
Letting us know what's out there.
I did that, I basically, I got off easy because I take her to dinner a few times.
Well, no, that was great that someone did call, but other than that, we would have had no idea.
Right,
No
I,
idea.
you're
Why are
right.
we not being communicated with? We're getting the
From the city.
forms, we're getting why are we not being communicated with?
Well, part of the reason, this is my opinion, So there's no.
Probably my opinion as well.
Well, I don't know if it'll be the case. We went from 4 meetings a month on Tuesday nights. First and third, official, reading of communications, committee reports, et cetera. Second and fourth were to be for purpose of just going into discussion on these matters. I don't think that simply like the Laws and Contract Committee are 3 people. There are 7 people on council. It needs to be thrashed out a little more. I don't think that happened. That was my opinion. Other ones were satisfied with the way it was coming down the pike. So I agree with your view, and the way we change that is start showing up at the meetings. They're every first and third Tuesdays. Be here. Talk to Jesse. We have to excuse him. He comes so often. Anyway, anybody else? I wanted to go into another subject.
I mean, there are Reading Facebook communities. That's how I heard about it. She posted it on the.
Yes, she did. That's to her credit. She did post it
There's a
up.
whole line of chat. We argue with her over this, that, the other. She didn't answer a lot of the questions, which you have tried to answer too from the chief. Where are the problem properties? Give me a property. That was the only one out there to tell you about. But if you own property Reading, it should belong to you before. And she runs and Mr. Powell runs. And that's how I found out about it.
But I don't think you should have to be on a social media platform to find out about things that are impacting you.
Well, you guys post your minutes on your own website?
Yes.
So you can see what's going on
Yes.
in the news?
I don't want to digress. I don't want to stay on this because Mr. Ashbrook did me a great favor tonight and putting together a PowerPoint on Benson Street, because we do have a strong wedding district. And we have a lot of fine shops and stores, and I'm biased. I think 1983, Mr. Ashbrook and Mr. Albrink, who's on council currently with us, and we worked to get a streetscape improvement environment. There was one councilman back there, or wasn't a councilman, a former councilman, said Benson Street wasn't worth saving. That broke my heart. I mean, I live a block off of Benson Street. So anyway, if we could, I'd like to have Bob put on his PowerPoint. If you'll stick around, I don't want to take it. And I think, Scott, you had something you wanted to say tonight?
Yeah, Rob.
Okay.
Let me hold this down
Thank you, Tony. I'm moving this microphone over here so I could advance the slides. It has been reported several different times lately that there is interest in revisiting the Benson Street streetscape. As you know, it was all done 40 years ago, and nothing goes on forever without needing an update. And so,
Does he pull the speakers here too?
no speakers.
We're not.
Right. These speakers are working right there. That one's working right there. The fact that you're in the back by, I'll swallow the mic. Oh. But because it's a matter of public discussion right now, I'd hope that we could just provide all people present a little bit of history about how that project came to be and so forth. So we're going to talk about the West Benson Street Mixed-Use District. I'm making the distinction and calling it by its official name rather than the Reading Bridal District, because the Reading Bridal District is it's an entity, it's a business entity, but it doesn't exist in a formal sense in any of our zoning codes. So in any event, in about 1982 to 84, sometime around that, there was a significant amount of interest in improving the Reading business district, specifically Benson Street, to address a number of concerns. Flooding was bothering many property owners, especially water in the basement, sewers would back up and so on, because the Benson Street area had developed kind of in fits and starts over a period of 150 years. There had been various widenings of the street, had a relatively narrow right-of-way at 50 feet, and so there were narrow sidewalks. There were problems with some of the curbs that were actually the sidewalk in front of the property next to my dad's business on Benson Street at 203. the sidewalk was about a foot higher than the pavement, and you couldn't even open car doors and things of that sort. It was a rather harsh and uninviting environment, quite honestly. There was disinvestment. There were considerable number of uses that were rather harsh. Back then, it's completely different than what it is right now. There were about 58 properties on Benson Street in 1982. The relatively unified bridal district that you see right now was not anywhere like that back then. There were gas stations, there were factories, there were warehouses, there were commissaries, there were all kinds of uses that were not really compatible with a refined retail area. The project proceeded, but not without some objections. There were business owners who were unconvinced that it had merit. Tony mentioned earlier about one of the council members that said that it couldn't be saved because the different businesses had different interests. Some were concerned about such things as the loss of parking. Back then, parking was permitted on both sides of Benson Street on the street, and the plan was going to eliminate that in places to make room for trees and so on. So there was concern expressed about that. It was not done without some cost to the local or budding property owners as well. There was an expectation that they would participate in the cost of replacing the sidewalks. As most of you know, there is an ordinance in the city of Reading and in the state of Ohio's codified ordinances that makes the abutting property owners responsible for the sidewalks, and the curbs can be assessed as well. There was much discussion about that, and a decision was made that an evaluation would take place of all the conditions of all the sidewalks. Those who had faulty sidewalks would be properly assessed, but they were only going to be charged for an amount equivalent to as if their sidewalk was only 5 feet deep. You'll probably know that the sidewalk depth varies considerably on Benson Street right now. In some places it's 5 feet, and in some places it's 14 feet. So it didn't seem fair to make someone pay for a 14-foot sidewalk when the ordinances only really require 5. So there was discussions along those lines. Others were very concerned that the installation of this what would come to be a 5-foot in diameter storm sewer was going to disrupt the flow of traffic and impact their businesses in a very negative fashion. So there was opposition expressed for that too. Others didn't see any value in it for them. If the nature of your business is such that you don't count on walk-in traffic and so on, you would be less likely to be motivated to pay and contribute toward this effort. So there was a lot of lobbying, if you will, to convince those naysayers to get on board. I know my father spent considerable time up and down Benson Street speaking to a number of the owners that were skeptics, and finally got a pretty unified response, and ultimately council did approve it. It did achieve quite a few worthwhile accomplishments. As I mentioned, this 5-foot storm sewer was installed that minimizes the flooding concerns, and all the sidewalks were replaced with the long-lasting reusable pavers. That was one of the selling points, quite honestly, of the project, the fact that if any repairs were needed, the pavers could be taken up and relaid, and it wouldn't impact the appearance of the finished project. That particular feature of that sidewalk type has basically shown its value in the multiple repairs that have taken place on Benson Street during the last 40 years. Many of you will know that at Reading and Benson, in front of the Gall building, there was, in 1984, when the project was complete, there was parking there. Since then, that parking has been eliminated to create a turn lane. So the pavers were taken up, put right back down. And Ben would know from his involvement with Valley Central that they made some changes down there, closed off a curb cut, opened another one where they did their drive-through and so forth. all that got repaired in the same sort of fashion. Right across the street from Valley, where the Ross service station was, that was extensively changed. So while the pavers are thought by some to be kind of dated, they are nevertheless in perfect I won't say perfect condition, but the city engineer about 15 years ago said they would easily be good for another 50 years. I mean, it's concrete that's produced under factory type conditions, hardened, and it is something of value that our community paid for, and it would hopefully be reused as any portion of an update that might come down the road. The harsh nature of the urban environment was softened by the installation of the street trees. That also has been controversial. They've been replaced once, and they're in need of replacement again. One of the other great accomplishments was that it did eliminate, through voluntary efforts, the overhead electrical service drops. There was a desire to replace or eliminate the overhead wiring entirely, but the cost was going to be tremendously high because of the high number of transformers that are, there's one on almost every other pole. So making room for those would greatly increase the cost of that. It was decided and recommended by the city's engineers, KZF, to replace the electrical poles with much higher ones and move the wires all the way to the top to get them far above your visual plane, and then further conceal them by installing the trees. What was left then is to eliminate the wires that would join from the poles to the buildings. And to that end, of the 58 buildings that were on the street at the time, all but 8 of them have eliminated their overhead electrical service. At the time, Time Warner was just coming to town, and all the property owners were given the opportunity to get conduits installed to the edge of their property line for use by Time Warner. At that time, all of Benson Street's telephone service was already underground. It had been underground since 1890. So there were never any overhead telephone connections on Benson. And then, of course, we added the street furnishings, the benches, the planters, and trash receptacles, and so forth, and finally included the installation of decorative period-style street lighting. The bridal district is a very essential part of our local economy, as Tony has mentioned, and quite honestly, in a Amazon-dominated retail world, it's hard to think that you would get any type of other retail businesses to fill the storefronts were it not for the bridal district and the experiential nature of their operation, where people want to come out and physically be present rather than doing things online. So I think it's proper that we recognize their importance to our community, and further to recognize the great work that they've already done. They produced this list that was shared, 2019 Reading Bridal District top goals. And I've reprinted for you 3 of those. The other 5 that are on here are items that are internal to their organization. Certainly, anyone who owns a business and wants it to succeed knows that their personal efforts are of great importance. They can further advance their cause through communal efforts. And finally, the third source of help would be the government. And I think most of you, if you're entrepreneurial in nature, you tend to think that the government's involvement should be minimal. So to their great credit, they've already done such thing as they're working on a brand strategy and improving internal organization of the Reading Bridal District, business recruitment and expansion. These 3 items from their list are the ones that I want to speak to slightly tonight, and we won't go through all of them. I'm going to stop here pretty short. But they wanted to have, or they're interested in cooperating, I'm sure, to make streetscape improvements and infrastructure improvements, flower pots, the trash cans, banners, repave the street and public parking lots, bury the utility lines, increase public parking capacity and better delineate public parking, install new tree lighting, gateway improvements. And they want it to be made more walkable, step up policing, cameras, and so on. And finally, their city-related ask is with regard to zoning improvements. I'm happy to report that we can cross that one off, the zoning improvements to improve building design standards, because in about 2010, I think it was, I introduced legislation that created the West Benson Street Design Review District, and that did impose a requirement that certain design standards be met. Now, I can't tell you with certainty how well they're being enforced, but it's really already in our code, so that's one that's we can skip right over, I think. So what are some of the opportunities and challenges with respect to the utilities? Part of the problem is illustrated by what you're seeing in these two images, and I don't know how clear that is, but the image on the left is a mess, and it illustrates how the private utilities, the registered users of our right-of-way, in this case Time Warner, have failed to maintain to do their work. You can see they've got a tremendous service loop hanging on the side of that pole, and you can see at the base of that pole the conduits that were installed at the city's expense 40 years ago that would enable Time Warner to convey their services to those building owners. Sadly, their technicians, when they come out, they just do whatever they want. They climb a pole and they run a wire, and what was pretty much a streetscape devoid of those overhead drops 40 years ago is now cluttered with them. The picture on the right shows, it attempts to show some more of those empty conduits that aren't being properly utilized. And then the other thing we can do is clean up abandoned facilities. The image on the left is just how Time Warner left the street after Duke Energy replaced the pole. You can see they haven't restored the pavers, and they've got their conduits just sticking up out of the ground as a trip hazard. Once again, that shouldn't be a cost to the city to remedy. It just is a matter of being vigilant and seeking enforcement. The picture on the right shows how Time Warner had 15 or 20 cables coming up out of the ground in the vicinity of those electrical service elbows, and they've been cut off. They just say, well, we'll just do something else. So that's what you get if you don't have someone watching it like a hawk. And then the third thing and these are all what I would consider low-hanging fruit. Finish the private connections that were not done 40 years ago. When the rest of the, when the 50 of the 58 property owners spent the money to get their electrical service made underground, there were about 8 holdouts. And sadly, several of them are bridal district owners who are now asking for help in this regard. In fairness to them, I think they're simply unaware that the provision has been made for this hookup. There's great value in institutional knowledge, and the only folks that are aware of this that I know of that have anything to do with the city is Councilman Gertz, who was the mayor at the time, and Councilman Albrink, who was the safety service director at the time. And while I'm not on council, I have the knowledge because my father owned business, and I was walking up and down the street, and I was paying close attention to everything that was going on. So the mayor, the safety service director, the chief of public works, they don't have the knowledge about what was done 40 years ago. And while in some instances they've been kind of provided this knowledge, seemingly for reasons not quite known to me, there hasn't been much done about it. So, you know, if those 8 parties would do what everyone else did 40 years ago, you'd really be cleaning up some of the mess. And then finally, some of the other problems are that there's a lack of administration support. The mayor says, I do not approve of single taxpayer dollar being spent on putting utility lines underground. So it's going to be incumbent upon those property owners to help themselves. And I think that they're not doing it out of spite, or I think it's just they're not aware. They've never been asked, and I think that that is something that certainly should be done. And conversations with the Bridal District people, I'm sure, would result in cooperation from them. You know, if they wanted to press to eliminate completely the overhead wirings, there would be some serious problems with transformers, as I mentioned earlier on. There's not enough right-of-way for ground-mounted transformers to be used, which is typically what you would see in a residential development. You know, in downtown Cincinnati, the transformers are in vaults underground under the sidewalk with grates over them and fans blowing, and I don't think that that's something that would be well received here, number one. And even if there was a willingness to do it, the vaults would have to fight with existing underground water, sewer, phone, gas, laterals, and would require these open grates. So I think that the practical long-term view in the city of Reading on Benson would be some hybrid approach to this, maintaining the poles and the distribution lines on those and having all the laterals underground. I think Time Warner and Cincinnati Bell could move all of theirs underground, and they could rely on ground-mounted pedestals like you would see, and those pedestals could be concealed in the tree grates and so other places of that sort. So, you know, if they wanted to get rid of all the wires and all the poles, it would have a very high cost, and the question then would be who would pay, and whether or not there would be a willingness for assessment. So this is really all I've prepared, Tony. I think that there's many other questions that will come up as discussions about Benson Street advances, certainly the parking concerns and safety concerns that I mentioned. I've given great thought to, and I will happily share with you or your group information about that in the future.
Well, Bob, I want to thank you for your time, and I appreciate everyone's patience and listening. I think it behooves us to know, because it's in the second ward. All of Benson Street from Reading Road, if you can turn that off, I'd appreciate it. There, thank you. Is in my ward, and I was, you know, I never got very far in life. I moved from one corner of the block to the other. I've been there. I'm 76 years old, people, so you can call it whatever you want. But I like it there, and I want that to survive. And I think something that Bob alluded to, and we didn't explore in great depth, I'm also very involved in wanting to reduce the cost for people that, in my ward, that has to pay flood insurance. Flood insurance is an expensive option down where we live here because of our close proximity to the Mill Creek and all of the people that, you know, the watershed that goes down through here. There's a gentleman that lives up on Jefferson Avenue, who's never had any water anywhere around his property and has to pay flood insurance. So there's a 5-foot in diameter pipe that we put under Benson Street there, and there's many other projects that we need to choose. Does anybody have any questions from Bob concerning the Benson Street? Because the reason I wanted to do it, because I don't want to let it fade, personally. I'm very biased. I'm not a hypocrite. I think that when we created the environment for a business district, that brought the Bridal District here. Now, we didn't know that was going to happen, but I'm very biased to say that had we not had the environment, we wouldn't have had the same kind of result. Now, Scott, I think you had something you had mentioned earlier you wanted to bring up tonight in this meeting too. This is Scott Bothy.
Yeah, hi. So I grew up here in Reading. I went to Reading High School, and I just recently moved back. I was gone for a while. I didn't go too far. I was just over Lawrence Nights. But something that I wanted to talk about was a lot of things in Reading that, you know, I feel like we've made a lot of success and a lot of headway on a lot of different things. New school's great. It's one of the reasons I moved back. I moved right across the street from it. So I could raise my family there and send my kids there. But I feel like we've sort of got on, you know, maybe a little bit in the rears on some of the facilities. This is a, you know, fine council chamber, I guess, but I feel like the fire department, where it sits here in this sort of residential area, the police department, the same, the administrative, you know, all this stuff being packed right in this little area. I'm surprised that after being gone for a long time and coming back, and it doesn't seem like you've really moved along when it comes to those sorts of things. I'd like to see this city progress in that way and build those facilities out and put them in a proper area, which is, in my opinion, is out on Reading Road, where it's more visible to the community. So when you're going down Reading Road, you know you're in Reading because you see the Reading Fire Department, you see the Reading Police Department, and administratively. And the same thing goes for the facilities as far as, you know, Hayden Field House is a fine place, but it's the same place that there's been for years, and it's, in my opinion, it's a little undersized. The pool's the same thing. It's been, you know, the same pool forever. No rec center, you know, for kids to go to. I just, that's the, I guess the point I'd like to make is a long-term vision for the city where we improve those facilities through, if it's gonna take a bond or, you know, I'm sure there's grants and stuff like that are available. But can we at least make it part of our vision moving forward for Reading for the next 20, you know, years, 30 years, to where we can have those facilities, provide those facilities. Just like, you know, I mean, it took a long time to get that new school done, but it's done now. It took up, everybody had to get in their pockets to do it. But can Reading do that same thing in providing those facilities and those services for its residents moving forward? I think we can, and that's something I'd like to see the city accomplish.
I mean, it's an open floor, so anybody that wants to comment on it or have a view or whatever, I think it's opportunity to do it.
Well, I mean, I'm not a fan of big new government buildings. I think this building is serving the city well. I haven't heard a lot of problems with it, but I've lived in other communities. And I've owned property here for almost 40 years, so I'm a little opposed to what you're talking about. Building a Reading Road. Reading Road should be for businesses that bring in industry and commercial and all the retail, not public buildings, but I'm sorry. So I'll just tell you, I used to live in Silverton back in the day, and they wanted a new public service building too, and I met with them, and they nearly ran me out of town when I said, what am I going to get for it? I go to City Hall maybe once a year. Now, I've been up here a number of times the last few weeks because of this ordinance, but I'm not a big fan of big government. But if you look at Blue Ash, what they build around these Taj Mahals that we see going their fire departments, oh my, the cupolas, the big towers, what a waste of money. Reading is lean.
And it draws people in.
What's that?
It's beautiful and it draws people
I don't think
in.
so. I'm not going to buy a Blue Ash because of the big new fire building. I got to tell you.
I think
Anyway,
what she's saying is,
It speaks to a culture.
it's like me and Tony were talking about this the other night. You know, when you go to an important meeting, or you go, when I go to meet a client, I'm a small business owner, I dress right, and I want to look right. And I think it's the face of your city, and it is important. Like you say, if you want to draw in business, you need to look professional. I'm not saying that this isn't professional, but I'm just saying it is dated. Blue Ash does, the reason that they build those things, now I'm not trying to build a cathedral to a fire department. I'm talking about an updated firehouse that makes sense. This firehouse that's below us, in my opinion, does not make sense. It's in a residential area where they have to pull out onto a small street and then out on another small street, whereas if they're out on Reading Road, they're pulling out onto a large road that it makes sense for a fire engine to pull out onto. The police, you know, they can't even take a guy out of a police car. They have to do it out in the parking lot. You know, those kinds of things. The fire trucks can't pull through like every other fire department you see. They have to back in and stuff like that. These facilities, in my opinion, are not up, they're not up to snuff. And that, I think in long term, I'm not saying let's pass a bunch of new taxes and pay for all this stuff tomorrow. I'm saying it should be a long-term goal of this city to update these facilities.
Well, we've been here, first of all, I appreciate your patience and your involvement. And I'm gonna do this every fourth Tuesday of the month. I may just be me talking to Mark, and to Bob, I don't know. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is I want to make it an open discussion. I would like to see all of council on the fourth Tuesday back to where we were. If they don't, I'm going to be here, or even the second Tuesday of the month. But I do like the interplay that we're having among citizens, and this whole COVID thing has ruined it in many, many ways, not just making people sick, but ruining the ability for us to communicate like we should be. Mark, you had a question?
Yeah, I agree. I think there's really, having put on big events from no budget, I think there's no topic out there that we shouldn't be able to at least discuss and explore. And maybe we'll find out that, we all can't afford this or we can't afford that. Well, maybe, but let's explore it. And if someone from the public agrees with Scott and his proposals, then join the committee. Let's get people involved in it and let people help who want to do those things.
You're right. I mean, to pick up on your point, Mr. Lindeman, he had to leave, is the head of the Utilities, Buildings, and Lands Committee, and he has been working on developing these kind of inputs about how. Right now, they're primarily looking kind of at Benson Street because it is 40 years, but I'm biased because I live down here. And, but I don't want to see it deteriorate, and I want to see it grow. But I want involvement of discussion, and I get people involved in showing up and talking about it. A very good group. I wish they had stayed a little longer, and I give Sabrina a lot of credit, as they just left with the We Thrive group that has really done wonderful things. Just with the planters, I thought there were 30 or 40, but there's like 60, 65 planters all over town, which they were able to get individuals, families, to take a planter and take care of it. So it took all that off of the city's burden, and they got the joy of doing it. My wife and I, I'm not a flower child, but I am learning. I like bougainvilleas and mandavillas and some of these other flowers that she's getting in. I know Justin has a lot of foliage too. Anyway, I don't want to go on forever. I can't try to keep this at all. They told me one long time ago, any meeting that goes more than about 45 minutes or a half an hour gets useless. So an hour has been plenty. I appreciate you coming out tonight. Unless somebody really has something you want to go into in more depth, feel free to speak.
I'm advocating for a bike trail along the way.
Now, Mr. Ashbrook has been promoting that for a long time.
I need that more than any new fire building. Sorry. You get
Well,
a bike trail, this place will boom.
I
agree. So I'm willing to pay more taxes for that than a fire building.
I would mention that I wish I could reveal a little bit more about what's going on.
Thank you, Sheila.
With respect to the development of that trail. I think you'll be hearing a public announcement probably within the next 3 months that will move the needle significantly toward doing that. So
For Reading, not for the.
I think a lot of the things, the ideas that come up that you see around the state, right? Just haven't really been discussed in a long time.
Yeah.
And I think that that's part of the job of council and the people to discuss these things and figure out what we would want and what we could afford and how we could afford it.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of things we can do, but all these things take time to process. And so some things are shorter than others. So if we start now talking about the feasibility, say it's firehouse or rec center, we may not get there for 10 years. We may get there. If we don't talk to it, if we don't talk about it now,
You gotta start talking.
and it might happen in a year.
Yeah.
But if we don't start talking about it, it'll never happen.
That's things that I feel like these things
Justin,
haven't been talked about.
Thank you, John. I want to make sure,
Just
Justin.
real quick before we leave, there is the long-term plan that you let me read through, and that there is a copy down at the library.
Yes.
It was just completed this past year, and it was done by a committee that was formed by council, I believe.
I think it was the economic development director, but that needs to be examined too, because as you look at there about the bridal district, I don't know, maybe my math is getting bad, but $3.5 billion is generated. I mean, each business generated $66 million. I think we gotta go back and look at the numbers a little more in that book too.
Where the city wants to go.
Thanks, Justin. Well, thank you again for coming. I don't want to belabor it. And we'll be back here next month at 4th Tuesday. Thanks, thank you, sir. Okay.